setting new standards in podcast excellence. You have joined the WBT, fully focused on business and taxes. Here is your host, Michael Lodge.
And welcome to the WBT. This is Michael Lodge. I'm glad that you have joined me. You know, I've been doing all these podcasts over these past 2 weeks, 4 months it seems like, about the pandemic and about coronavirus and about the racial tension and, oh, you name it, everything that has gone wrong in America. So I decided, you know what, I got to do a pod because I am a business podcaster, right? I am the individual who's always talking about business and taxes and how politics affects our business and what bills are coming up. I talk about all this stuff. But I kind of have forgotten about it over the past few weeks because we have been under lockdown. My mind has been on that. We have been in a political situation on the streets where we have had riots and protests and everything else going on. So that has been on my mind. And so I think that right now we need to sit back and really think about what we're doing here. Because we have some little ones around us. And they probably see that you're stressed. They see that you may have lost your job, you're on unemployment or whatever it may be, and so you have a financial stress. You have something that's hitting you hard every single day. When you go up to that checkout stand to buy groceries and you see that it is so high, that bill that comes back where you've just paid 80 cents for one single onion. Oh, that's happened to me, okay? Personal experience. You're literally shocked at what you see. I remember that when on a weekly basis, I used to spend, between $50 and $80. Now I am spending about $150 a week just because food prices have gone up. Especially here in Southern California because it takes a lot more expense to ship a tomato from South Carolina down to the South. Here in South Florida. And truckers might be under quarantine, so they're at home, so things are moving a little bit slower, but they're getting in. The food products are getting in that we need. It's just that sometimes they are a little bit higher, which pisses me off. Sad, isn't it? But I think that when we have these little ones around us, we have a teaching experience here. Because they're watching you. They're seeing how you respond, how you take care of things. And so they're watching you. How are you handling your budget? Do you have a budget? Are you living within your budget? Are you teaching them about the use of money, the sources and use of money, as we say in business? You see, kids pick up on these things. And this is a valuable time to teach money lessons that will stick with them forever. I still remember when I was young and my dad had lost his job. He was in severe pain with back pain, so he had to stay home. So we didn't have any money coming in except for disability for my dad. And at that time, it wasn't very much. So my mom had to go out and get jobs. And our budget was tight, and I could tell it was tight because I was watching what was going on. My mom had to go out there and get 2 jobs. She was doing housekeeping for people. Then she got a job in a factory where they made what was called clinkers. And what it was 2 balls tied to a string, and you would toss these things and they would clink against each other, up and down, up and down. I don't know if you remember that. And they also made these fiberglass things that looked like grapes, and they formed them into grapes as you put on your table and coffee table. You know how it was back then. Well, maybe you don't, because some of you weren't around. But back in the 60s and in the 70s, we had a lot of things like that were really dangerous, because some of those things would break and they would get into your eye and cut you and everything else. But I remember her working those jobs. And I remember I wanted piano lessons. And so what she did is she worked out a deal with the piano teacher. Listen, if you teach my child for 1 hour, when I take him there, I will clean your house for that 1 hour. And I will make sure it's clean. So that's how we work things to make things meet. And the reality is that parents at that time, and I was watching and I was learning from it, the reality is not only can you be that teacher, if you are a parent, you will be a teacher whether or not if you think you are or not, because those kids are watching you. I guarantee it, because I was watching my parents as they went through this struggle. I've gone through about 4 recessions now, where we literally have had a tough time. But when you, as a family, are touched by close poverty, where you're trying to make ends meet, I saw during that time that my mom worked so hard to keep the family alive. She wanted us to go to private Christian schools, so she worked so hard that even I had to work at that time. When I got to high school, I had to work in a furniture factory to pay for my private education. Worked half a day and then went to school half a day. But when you're going through these tough times, we have to really focus in on the children who are watching us and make sure that you are leading a good example, because that's how they're going to form their life later on. If you are buying comfort food because it makes you feel good, they're going to see that. They're going to see that, oh, Mom, we got a dozen donuts. How come we don't have any bananas? They see that, so you are teaching that. So if you are buying comfort food to make you feel good, kids catch on. They see that. I saw it. So that's why I said at the very beginning of this year when I did my podcast, and even I was doing it in October, November, December. I said, sit down, buy yourself a journal, and set yourself a budget for every single month. You know what your income is going to be. You know what your expenses are going out. And then you know what items that you can maybe splurge on just a little bit for the family. But the point of a budget is to make sure that you have enough cash reserves in case of an emergency. In case the tire goes flat and you need to buy that tire. So you start building a $500 emergency fund, then you build it up to $1,000, and finally you get it up to $10,000, just in the event that you're faced with an emergency. And you never know when that emergency is going to come. Who knew that coronavirus was going to shut us all down? None of us knew. I bet you 100% that a lot of you did not have an emergency cash flow sitting out there in the bank account. So, get my point that if you do not budget yourself, and if you do not control your cash flow, and if you're not prepared for an emergency or a crisis or a disaster, you're setting yourself up for trouble. Now, granted, coronavirus, when it hit us. And it shut us all down. It shut my business down. It shut my practice down. Shut everything down. And thank God I had a reserve to make it through that crisis. Because I practice what I preach. But if we do not plan well, then we are setting ourselves up for a disaster. That's why I love my journal. Every day I take my journal, I write down everything that I thought about, every conversation that I have had, emails that I need to send out, etc. But I also have in there what my budget was for that month. How did I live up to that budget? How did I bring in enough cash to make sure that I had all of my expenses or outgoing checks accounted for? And that is something that if we don't focus on that every single day of our life, I know you don't want to think about it. A lot of you want to say, I just want to know, all I want to do is pull up my account on my computer of my bank account and see that I have money there. And then you forget about everything else about wisely spending money and building up those reserves for a rainy day, an emergency, crisis. We have to be well planned. Remember, God has told us that we have to be good stewards of our money, which means that we have to be good managers of what He has given us. And if we don't do that, we're going to look like fools to our children. So I would suggest that every single one of you, while you're going through this pandemic, and now some of the businesses are starting back up again, thank goodness. But remember how you taught your children by your example and by your financial example. Because they have been watching you and they're learning from you. And that's your responsibility to teach well. I learned so much from my mom. I knew that I had to have something to back me up in case something went wrong in another part of my field. I always had to have a backup plan. I always had to have an emergency financial plan. I always had to have a budget. And if I had to go out and get another job, I would go out and get that other job. In college, there were times where I had 3 jobs. I was fixing the desks and chairs for the dean of men in the men's dorm. I was working in a furniture factory, and I was a janitor. I think most of my time, I look back and I say, did I really have any fun times in college? Because I worked like hell. There was always something that I had to do. I remember one time I had to go home because my dad had a heart attack. And I wanted to fly home because that was the fastest way to get home. Otherwise, it would have been a 4-hour trip by car. And so they had this commuter plane that left Walla Walla and flew over to Spokane called Cascade Airways. We call it Crashcade because it crashed a lot of times. But it was cheap. It was $25. So I had to go down to the business manager at the university and say, listen, I need $25 out of my account. And he grilled me for over an hour before he finally gave me that $25. And I was able to go home. Now, I had worked for it. I had earned it. So it was mine there. But all of that money that I was earning had to go to my college education. So I've been in those situations where I have really had to scrape, really had to work hard. And I knew that there were people watching me. There were my peers around me watching me. My parents were watching me. Friends were watching me. And I had to make it through. I have gone through several crises in my life. And I have made it through. But I always knew that someone was watching how I performed during this crisis. And the same thing with the corona crisis. people have been watching you. And if you've made it through this corona crisis and you come out on the other side, you managed the crisis well. But always remember, if you have children, those children were watching you, how you handled that crisis. How you worked with the family, how you set a budget, and how you lived within that budget, and how you had an emergency fund just in case something else happened. It's an amazing world, this life. So I encourage every single one of you, get your journals out. Go to the store right now, get a journal, start writing down everything that you need to write down about your income and your budgets and the expenses going out. And make sure that you're living within a budget. People are watching you. Listen, this is Mike Lodge. I'll talk with you very soon. Everyone go out and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the WBT with Michael Lodge. Join us again tomorrow as we explore more about business and taxes. Follow us on iHeartRadio and go to our podcast website at www.wbtpod.com and listen to all of our podcasts and read our blogs.
This podcast has been produced by Michael Lodge, fully focused on content.